My name is Kaziah Monroe, but most people in this town just call me Kez. 60 years old, gray hair I refuse to dye, and a laugh that still surprises me when it escapes. I've lived in this Midwestern college town nearly my whole life. It's a place of oak-lined streets, red brick bookstores, and the smell of coffee that never really leaves your sweater. For decades, I taught writing workshops, edited manuscripts at the local press, and poured myself into a memoir that told the story of my family, my losses, my survival. That memoir was my marrow. Every sentence carried years of me. And then I made the mistake of sharing it. Her name was Lila Hart, 29, bright-eyed, with a hunger I recognized the first time she walked into my office. She asked if I would mentor her, help her learn the ropes of small press publishing. I saw myself in her, curious, eager, desperate to prove she had something worth saying. So I opened my door, and worse, I opened my drawers. She borrowed pieces of my memoir to study voice, she said. I let her flip through annotated drafts, listened as she asked questions about scenes I'd rewritten a dozen times. She smiled when I spoke about the nights I spent writing by candlelight after my husband's death, the mornings I rewrote chapters with trembling hands after my mother's funeral. She listened as if she cared. But caring was never the plan. Months later, I was in the corner booth of the cafe, sunlight warming my coffee. A student pressed a copy of a brand new hardcover into my hands. "Professor Monroe, you'll love this," she said. "Everyone's talking about it." The title stopped my breath. The Orchard House by Lila Hart. I opened it, and the words cut me open. Line after line, my lines. My childhood memory of the apple orchard. My brother's hands stained red. My father's silence at the kitchen table. Even the way I described the creak of the porch swing. Word for word. My heart hammered, my throat closed. I flipped page after page, nausea rising. Every passage felt like a theft. No, worse. Like my life had been gutted, hollowed out, and worn by someone else as a costume. Lila Hart's name glittered on the cover. My name was nowhere. By the time I reached the end, the cafe's chatter blurred into a roar. My hands shook so badly I spilled coffee across the table. Students stared. The barista frowned. But all I could see was that book, and the ghost of myself printed inside it. I stumbled home, clutching the novel like a wound. In my study, I pulled out my drafts, my audio recordings, the folders of correspondence where I'd mailed pieces of the manuscript to colleagues for feedback. All of it proof. All of it buried in drawers while Lila stood on stages, signing books with my life inside them. I pressed play on one of my recordings. My voice, raspier than I remembered, filled the room. I was 8 years old when I realized silence could break you harder than words. And on the page in Lila's novel, I read the same line. I covered my mouth, tears spilling. The betrayal wasn't just plagiarism, it was annihilation. She hadn't stolen my words. She had stolen me. That night, I sat at my desk until the lamp sputtered. A lifetime of writing, erased. But as dawn crept over the rooftops, something shifted. My grief twisted, hardened, found a new shape. If she wanted to wear my life as her story, I'd show her what happens when a storyteller fights back. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my desk with drafts stacked around me like broken bones. The words were mine, but the world was already calling them Lila's. And that thought made me feel smaller than I ever had in my life. The betrayal cut two ways. It stole my story, and it made me doubt I even deserved it back. At sunrise, I wrapped a scarf around my shoulders and opened the top drawer of the desk. Inside was a shoebox, faded, dented, heavy with years. I lifted it onto the desk and blew the dust off. It was full of cassette tapes. My voice on magnetic tape, recorded during sleepless nights when I'd read my drafts aloud. I used to joke that if anyone broke into my house, they'd find a ghost haunting the study. Now those ghosts were my weapons. I pushed an old tape into the recorder. The static hissed, and then my voice filled the room. Chapter 3. The Orchard After the Frost. My brother, his hands bleeding from branches. I pressed pause. Then I flipped open Lila's novel and found the same passage, almost word for word. My hand shook as I scrawled notes in the margin. Proof. Hard, undeniable proof. For hours, I compared draft to book, recording to page, my notes growing into a storm of red ink. By noon, my study looked like a crime scene. A life dissected, catalogued, nailed to the wall with thumbtacks and post-its. But proof wasn't enough, not in this world. Proof sat in drawers while publishers counted sales. Proof gathered dust while book clubs lined up for selfies with Lila Hart. I needed to decide, would I fight her in court or would I fight her in public? Court meant lawyers, money, endless delays. And maybe, by the time the gavel fell, my life story would already be history with her name stamped on it. Public meant risk. It meant humiliation if no one believed me. It meant dragging my grief into the light, raw and unvarnished. My throat tightened. 60 years old, and I was back to asking the same question I'd asked as a girl at that orchard. Would anyone believe me if I spoke? The phone rang, startling, loud in the silence. I picked up. Kez? It was Mark, an old colleague from the press. You've seen the news, haven't you? Lila Hart's book is everywhere. Oprah, for God's sake. I swallowed. I've seen it. His voice dropped. Kez, I think I recognize something in there. Something that wasn't hers. Am I right? The words hit like oxygen. Someone else had noticed. Someone else had heard me. Yes, I whispered. You're right. Then don't let her bury you, he said. Not after everything you've given this town, this community. Fight her. My fingers gripped the phone. My eyes burned. I don't know if I can. You already have the story, Mark said. Now you just need the courage. The line went dead. I sat in silence, staring at the stacks of drafts, the wall of evidence, the ghosts humming in cassette tape hiss. And slowly, a decision hardened in me. I wouldn't take her to court. I'd take her to the stage. But to stand in front of an audience, to bear myself and my words again, I needed one thing first, an invitation. And as fate would have it, one was already waiting in my inbox. A flyer for the annual Midwestern Writers Festival, guest of honor, Lila Hart. The flyer glowed on my laptop screen like a dare. Midwestern Writers Festival, keynote, Lila Hart. The same festival where I'd once read my earliest essays to half-empty folding chairs. Now it was sold out weeks in advance, every ticket gone, every spotlight aimed at her. I closed my eyes. The thought of walking into that auditorium, 60 years old, with trembling hands and ghosts in my pocket, it nearly broke me. But ghosts can become an army if you give them voice. So I began gathering my arsenal. On the dining table, I stacked my oldest drafts. Ink smudged, pages bent, margins scribbled in fury. Next to them, I laid out printed emails from editors I'd corresponded with over the years. Each one dated, time-stamped, stamped with proof of my ownership. Beside the papers sat the cassette tapes. My voice, raspier in some, steadier in others, carrying decades of breath pressed into magnetic ribbon. I spread them across the table like relics. At the end of the line was my journal, leather-worn, filled with notes scrawled after each workshop, after each conversation with Lila. Even my doubts were written there, especially my doubts. I looked at the spread. It didn't feel like evidence. It felt like my life dissected. But life dissected was exactly what Lila had stolen. And now I would use it to stitch myself back together. Still, a voice in me whispered, "What if they don't believe you?" I thought of the festival crowd. Young, hungry writers who worshipped Lila as a symbol of what they wanted to become. Readers who had cried over the orchard house, without knowing they were weeping over my childhood, my blood, my grief. Would they boo me? Would they call me bitter, jealous, washed up? My chest tightened. For a moment, I considered throwing everything back into the shoebox and locking it away. Then a ping, my email. It was from Mark again. Kez, I told a few people. Some of them remember your old workshop readings. They recognize lines in Lila's book. You're not alone. My throat clenched. Not alone. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly above me. Maybe I was old. Maybe I was bitter. Maybe the world didn't want another woman with gray hair and sharp words shouting into the void. But I had one thing Lila didn't. The truth. I picked up one of the tapes, slid it into the recorder, and pressed play. My own voice filled the room, steady despite the years. Memory is a fragile orchard, but if you plant carefully, it feeds generations. The exact line that had become the epigraph of Lila's best-selling novel. Tears burned my eyes, but this time I didn't cry. I pressed stop, slid the tape into my bag, and zipped it shut. I whispered to the empty room, "See you at the festival, Lila." The dining table still looked like a war map when I opened my laptop the next morning. Piles of drafts, tapes, and letters stared back at me like soldiers waiting for orders. If I was going to stand at that festival and face Lila, I couldn't go alone. So I began writing, not memoir this time, emails, messages, pleas. The first went to Sarah Jensen, one of my earliest students. She was 16 when she wrote about her parents' divorce in my workshop, trembling as she read her first lines aloud. She'd gone on to publish essays of her own. "Sarah," I typed, "do you remember the orchard piece I read in class years ago, the one you said made you cry? It's in Lila Hart's novel now, word for word. I need you to remember. I need you to tell me I'm not losing my mind." My hands shook as I hit send. Next, I wrote to Daniel, a former colleague at the press. He'd edited fragments of my memoir a decade ago, circling phrases in green ink. "Daniel, you know my voice. You held my pages in your hands. Please look at this book and tell me what you see." On and on I went. The messages felt like throwing bottles into a vast ocean, hoping someone would fish them out before they sank. By afternoon, replies began trickling in. Sarah wrote back first. "Kez, I remember every word. I can still hear your voice reading it. I'll stand with you." Daniel's email came an hour later. "I pulled out your old drafts. It's identical, Kez. Don't doubt yourself. You have to fight this." One by one, the witnesses came forward. Former students, editors, even a retired professor, who remembered my first public reading at the festival 25 years ago. They all remembered the orchard. They all remembered me. Tears blurred my vision, not tears of grief this time, but of relief. I wasn't alone. But with every message of support came a new fear. The more people I told, the more chance Lila would hear whispers. And if she heard whispers, she would prepare. That night, I dreamt of standing in the auditorium, lights burning my eyes, the crowd jeering while Lila smiled from the podium. I woke gasping, my sheets damp with sweat. Still, when I looked at the stack of replies in my inbox, I felt steadier. I had witnesses, I had proof, I had a plan. But plans are fragile things. And 3 days later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. My name written in neat, unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a single piece of paper, no signature, no return address. It read, "Stop. You don't know who you're fighting." The envelope lay on the kitchen counter all morning, its single line burning into me. "Stop. You don't know who you're fighting." I must have read it 50 times, hoping it would change, hoping I'd find a clue in the loops of the handwriting. But the letters were neat, mechanical, impossible to place. Fear has a taste, bitter metal on the tongue. I carried it all day. At 60, you think you've outgrown intimidation, but I hadn't. It slithered through my house, coiling around me as I tried to work, tried to eat, tried to breathe. By afternoon, I called Mark. "Someone knows," I told him. "Someone doesn't want me to push this." He was quiet for a long beat. Then, "That means you're getting close. People don't bother to threaten silence unless they're scared of the noise." His words steadied me, but only just. That night, I sat at my desk, staring at the festival flyer. Lila's face smiled from the announcement, all youthful confidence and false humility. The tagline read, "A new voice redefining Midwestern literature." My throat tightened. It wasn't a new voice, it was mine, hollowed out and repackaged. I opened my journal and began writing, not memoir, not notes for the reading, but questions. Why am I afraid? What will happen if no one believes me? What will happen if they do? The last question stopped me. If people believed me, if they saw Lila for what she was, then everything she had built would collapse, and I would be the one holding the match. The thought frightened me as much as it thrilled me. Maya, my neighbor 2 doors down, a retired librarian, knocked that evening. She often checked in since my husband passed. She spotted the envelope on the counter. "What's this?" she asked. "A warning," I said flatly. Her eyebrows lifted. "Then you must be on the right track." I laughed, but it came out more like a choke. Or the foolish one. Maya put her hand on mine. "Kez, you've spent your life teaching others to speak. Now it's your turn. Don't let them scare you quiet." After she left, I sat with her words. The fear was still there, thick and heavy. But layered beneath it, something else began to form. Resolve. I pulled the tapes closer, stacked the drafts neatly, and slid the evidence into my bag. The festival was only a week away, and for the first time, I didn't just feel like prey. I felt like someone sharpening her blade. The week before the festival, my house became a rehearsal hall. I closed the curtains, set up the old tape recorder on the coffee table, and spread my drafts across the couch cushions. My cat slinked away at the first sound of my voice. Maybe even he could sense the weight of it. I hadn't read my words aloud in years, not since before the betrayal. The first time I tried, my throat closed, the syllables cracking like glass. Chapter 1, I whispered. The orchard before the frost. I stopped. My hands shook. My heart thumped so loudly I could hear it in my ears. It felt like opening a wound that had barely scabbed. But I tried again. And again. Hour after hour, night after night. I stood in the living room, reading my life back to myself. The cassette recorder captured the tremor in my voice, but also the steel buried underneath. On the third night, Maya stopped by with soup. She stood in the doorway, listening without saying a word. When I finally set the pages down, she handed me a spoon. "You sound like you again," she said softly. I wanted to believe her. Still, the doubts gnawed. Lila was young, polished, adored by critics. I was 60, my hair silver, my voice raspy. Would anyone want to listen to me now? Or would they see me as an old woman bitter about someone else's success? I recorded another take, played it back. My voice filled the room. I was 8 years old when I realized silence could wound deeper than words. The line vibrated through the air, through me. For the first time, I didn't just hear fragility, I heard fire. I began marking my pages with notes. Pause here, breathe here, let them feel the silence here. Rehearsal became ritual. The act of taking back space with my voice was more than preparation. It was defiance. By Friday, the living room walls seemed to hum with echoes of me. I wasn't hiding anymore. But late that night, as I packed my bag with drafts and tapes, I noticed something strange. The envelope with the warning was gone. I searched the counter, the trash, even under the fridge. Nothing. My chest tightened. Someone had been in my house. And suddenly, rehearsal didn't feel like enough. The empty spot on the counter stared at me like an accusation. The envelope was gone. Someone had been in my house. The locks weren't broken, the windows still shut. Whoever it was, they had moved with quiet precision. Just enough to let me know I wasn't safe. I barely slept that night. Every creak in the floorboards made my skin prickle. I sat upright in bed until dawn, clutching a flashlight like a weapon, wondering if the next noise would be footsteps in the hall. By morning, I was hollow. Fear does that. It empties you out, scoops you raw. Maya knocked on the door after seeing my light on all night. When I told her what had happened, her face went pale. "You should call the police," she said. "And tell them what? That someone stole a threatening letter?" I shook my head. "They'll pat me on the hand and tell me to change my locks." Maya frowned. "So what will you do?" I looked at the drafts stacked on the dining table, the tapes in my bag, the flyer for the festival pinned to the fridge. "I go anyway," I said. She blinked. "After this?" "Because of this." My voice cracked, but I didn't back down. If I stop now, then they win twice. Once by stealing my words, and again by silencing me. Maya reached out, squeezing my hand. "Then we'll go together. You won't walk into that hall alone." Her words steadied me, though fear still burned in my chest. Later, as I prepared tea, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Lila Hart's novel had just been shortlisted for a national award. Headlines praised her as a fresh voice in American memoir-style fiction. I nearly dropped the mug. The timing felt cruel, like the universe was rubbing salt in my wound. But beneath the sting was something else, a spark of rage so hot it burned through the fear. If Lila wanted to rise on my story, she would have to rise, knowing I was coming for her. That night, I returned to rehearsal. My voice shook, but I kept reading. Louder, clearer. Every sentence was a blade sharpening for the day I would stand in front of her. And for the first time, I wasn't just rehearsing for myself. I was rehearsing for a war. The morning of the festival came gray and damp, the kind of Midwestern sky that looked like wet wool stretched to the horizon. I loaded my bag carefully, annotated drafts, cassette tapes, printed emails, my leather journal. Every piece of evidence, every shard of memory. Maya insisted on carrying half of it, refusing to let me bear the weight alone. As we pulled onto the highway, the town rolled away behind us. Familiar storefronts, the press office where I'd once edited manuscripts, the cafe where I first held Lila's book. Each place felt like a wound stitched, but still aching. The drive was quiet at first. My hands gripped the wheel harder than I realized. Maya broke the silence. "Do you want me to record your reading on my phone?" I glanced at her. "Why?" "So if they try to twist it, we'll have the truth." Her words steadied me. "Yes, record everything. 2 hours later, the city skyline rose, a mix of glass towers and old church steeples. The festival banners hung from lampposts. Midwestern Writers' Festival, celebrating new voices. New voices, the phrase made my stomach knot. The convention center buzzed with traffic. Crowds of writers, students, publishers streamed inside, clutching tote bags stuffed with programs and paperbacks. Posters of Lila Hart's face smiled from every corner, her name in bold type. I stopped just inside the entrance. For a moment, the urge to turn and run was overwhelming. My chest clenched, my breath shallow. Maya touched my arm. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do." My voice surprised even me. Low, steady, carved from something harder than fear. We walked into the main hall. The air smelled of coffee and new books. The stage was lit in warm gold. Rows of chairs already filling. Volunteers bustled, guiding attendees to panels, smiling at badges. I caught whispers as we passed. "That's Kaziah Monroe. Wasn't she a professor here? Didn't she publish essays back in the 90s? The whispers stung, but they also reminded me I had existed long before Lila. My voice had lived here, even if the world had forgotten. We found seats near the front. My bag sat heavy in my lap, every cassette and page humming like a heartbeat. The program began. Speakers welcomed the crowd, praised the thriving regional scene, announced the keynote. And then, from the wings, Lila Hart walked on stage. She looked radiant. Sharp suit, hair glossy, smile perfected. The audience erupted in applause. She waved like royalty. My throat tightened. I leaned closer to Maya and whispered, "That's my ghost in her hands." Maya's jaw set. "Then take it back." And as Lila opened her book to read aloud, I gripped the recorder in my bag. The moment was coming. Lila opened her book and began to read. Her voice was smooth, measured, trained for the stage. The kind of voice that made an audience lean in, even if the words were empty. But the words weren't empty. They were mine. Chapter 3, she read. The orchard after the frost. My brother, his hands bleeding from branches, holding the harvest as if he could save it with pain alone. A gasp lodged in my throat. I had written those sentences at 2 a.m, decades ago, hunched over my desk with the heater rattling and tears dripping onto the paper. Now here they were, dressed in her cadence, polished by her confidence, applauded by strangers who thought they belonged to her. The audience sighed in admiration. Someone whispered, "Beautiful." My hands clenched around my bag until my knuckles ached. Maya leaned close. "Kez, breathe." But I couldn't. Each word that fell from Lila's lips was another theft, another blow. She smiled between passages, gracious, humble, the picture of authenticity. But her eyes flicked once across the crowd, and I swore they met mine. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw triumph in them. The rage nearly made me stand right then, to shout, "Those are mine. You are a thief." But I didn't, not yet. I forced myself to stay seated, to let her finish. If I rose too soon, they would call me bitter. A heckler, an old woman jealous of youth. I had to wait for my moment. Lila read another line, this time one of my most intimate. I was 8 when I learned silence could wound deeper than words. The line echoed through the hall. Gasps, murmurs, pen scribbling notes. My chest burned. That line wasn't just mine, it was my marrow. Maya gripped my hand. "She can't hold it much longer. When it's your turn, you'll cut her open." Her words steadied me, but only slightly. I still felt as if I were bleeding invisibly in front of hundreds of people. The reading ended with thunderous applause. Lila bowed her head, modest in posture, proud in victory. She closed the book, kissed its cover, and thanked the audience. The moderator smiled and said, "We'll now invite Kaziah Monroe, one of our longtime contributors, to share a reading." My name rang out across the hall, and for the first time in years, the silence belonged to me. My name echoed in the auditorium. For a heartbeat, I couldn't move. Then Maya squeezed my hand. "Go," she whispered. So I did. Each step up the aisle felt heavier than my 60 years. I carried not just the weight of my bag, but the weight of silence, years of it, pressing on my shoulders. When I reached the podium, the lights blinded me. A sea of faces blurred into shadow. All I could see clearly was the microphone, black, gleaming, waiting. I set down my bag and pulled out the first draft. The paper shook in my hand. "Good afternoon," I said, my voice thin. A polite murmur rolled through the crowd. Some leaned forward with curiosity. Others glanced at Lila, as if wondering why this gray-haired woman was here at all. I breathed once, deep, then I began. Chapter 1 I read. The orchard before the frost. My brother's laughter breaking like glass in the cold air. A hush fell. I continued, the words catching at first, then loosening as if my voice remembered how to walk. Line by line, I rebuilt the orchard, the branches, the blood, the silence. And then I did something I hadn't planned. I stopped, reached into my bag, and lifted a cassette tape. This, I said, holding it up to the lights, is me, 25 years ago, reading the same passage you just heard from another mouth. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Lila shifted in her seat. I pressed play on the recorder. Static hissed. Then my younger voice filled the hall, raspy but steady. Chapter 1. The orchard before the frost. Gasps. Heads turned. People glanced from me to Lila, then back again. My heart hammered, but I kept reading, switching between the draft in my hand and the voice on the tape. Past and present braided together, undeniable. By the time I finished, the silence in the room was different, heavy, charged. I set down the paper. My words have lived a long life. They've been stolen, but they're mine. And today, I claim them back. For a long moment, no one moved, no one spoke. Then a single pair of hands began to clap, slow, deliberate. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet hall. The slow clap spread like a ripple. One hand, then two, then a cluster. Some faces glowed with recognition. Others tightened with suspicion. The applause grew but fractured. Polite in some corners, fierce in others, and absent in many. I could feel the divide opening like a fault line under the chairs. "Those are her words," a man muttered behind me. "No," someone else whispered back. "I swear I heard Kez read that in workshop years ago." The air buzzed with murmurs, like bees deciding whether to swarm. I gripped the podium. My knees trembled, but my voice didn't. "These tapes, these drafts, these journals, they're my proof. Not bitterness, not envy, proof." I held the cassette up again. The question isn't whether the words are beautiful. The question is whose blood grew them. Gasps, silence, the kind that clings. From the front row, Lila shifted. She uncrossed her legs, leaned forward, her smile carefully fixed. The moderator cleared his throat, uncertain. "Thank you, Kaziah, for that powerful reading. Perhaps," but Lila stood. "If I may?" The crowd hushed instantly. She stepped toward the microphone with the confidence of someone used to owning the room. "First, I want to thank Kaziah. She was a mentor to me, a guiding light. If my words echo hers, it's only because she shaped me." Polite laughter, nods. She was disarming them, twisting the knife while looking gracious. I felt my stomach turn. Lila continued, her tone silky. "We all learn from those before us. Isn't that the essence of art? To absorb, to reflect, to carry forward? If Kaziah feels echoes in my work, then I see that as a tribute." The audience hummed. Some nodded in agreement. Others looked at me with pity. Tribute. The word rang in my skull like mockery. I leaned into the mic. A tribute doesn't erase the author's name. The tension in the room spiked. Maya's phone recorded every second. My heart knew this wasn't just about the festival anymore. It was about the narrative the world would see afterward. And as the murmurs swelled again, Lila's eyes finally met mine. They were calm, sharp, calculating. This wasn't over. It was only the first blow. The room held its breath. I could feel the audience teetering, swaying between us like a jury without a verdict. Lila's charm was strong, but my proof was stronger. I reached back into my bag and pulled out another draft. Yellowed, marked with coffee stains, and my handwriting in the margins. "This page," I said, holding it up so the front rows could see, "was written in 1998. My editor circled this exact phrase in green ink. I read aloud. "The orchard is a graveyard of sweetness, fruit rotting where laughter used to live." Then I lifted Lila's book and opened to page 97. I read the same line, word for word. Gasps rippled again. The moderator shifted uncomfortably. Lila's smile never faltered, but her fingers drummed lightly on the chair. "Coincidence?" I asked the crowd. "Echo? Tribute?" My voice sharpened. "Or theft?" A woman in the third row whispered audibly, "That's too exact to be tribute." Someone else muttered, "She's right." The tension thickened. I pressed on. These tapes, these drafts, these journals, they are not whispers. They are a trail, a lifetime. If my words live in her book, it's because they were taken. The audience stirred, their faces torn between admiration for Lila and the weight of my evidence. Finally, Lila rose again, calm as ever. "Kaziah," she said smoothly, "I never denied your influence. But stories don't belong to one person. They belong to all who hear them, all who share them." Applause burst from a section of the crowd. She had her supporters, ready to defend her, ready to dismiss me as bitter ownership. I steadied myself, breathing deep. "My orchard," I said, voice steady now, "wasn't a story you heard. It was my childhood, my blood, my brother's scars. If you think that belongs to everyone, then you've never lived it." The room fell silent again, as if my words had sliced the applause in half. But silence doesn't last. From the back of the hall, a voice called out, "Show us more." The crowd murmured, expectant, pressing forward. I felt the weight of my bag again. Drafts, tapes, journals. An arsenal waiting to be unleashed. And I realized this wasn't just a reading anymore. It was a trial. The hall pressed closer, hundreds of eyes leaning toward me. The call from the back, "Show us more," still vibrated in the air. So I did. I laid out 3 more drafts across the podium. The pages yellowed, creased, edges softened by time. "These are from 2001, I said, voice steady. "You'll find the same orchard, the same scars, the same silence." I read another passage aloud, then flipped open Lila's book to the mirror image. Gasps, murmurs, a shifting sea of disbelief. Maya filmed everything, her phone a silent sentinel, capturing proof. Lila's smile strained, just enough for me to see the crack. She rose, interrupting. "Of course our work overlaps. Kaziah was a mentor. She gave me these stories." "No," my voice rang sharper than I expected. "I shared my life, my pain. I never gave you the right to wear it as your mask." The audience stirred, some clapping, some whispering fiercely. The moderator stepped forward, hands raised. "Ladies, perhaps we can—" But the crowd wasn't interested in civility anymore. They wanted truth. I pulled one last item from my bag, my leather journal. I flipped it open, holding up a page with ink blotted from tears. This entry was written the night my brother was hospitalized, his hand torn from the orchard's wire fence. You'll find it, almost verbatim, on page 143 of her book. I read my words, raw and cracked, then read hers. The silence that followed was suffocating. Finally, someone shouted from the middle rows, "She stole it!" Applause erupted, scattered, uneven, but real. Others shook their heads, torn between loyalty to Lila and the proof in front of them. The moderator's voice trembled. Perhaps we should break for questions. But Lila stepped closer to the mic, eyes blazing now. "This is slander. She's trying to rewrite my work as her own." The crowd roared, half in protest, half in defense. The hall was no longer a festival. It was a battleground. And I stood in the center, heart hammering, knowing I had more to show. The hall had become a storm. Voices clashed like thunder, some shouting, "Thief!" while others cried, "Lies!" The moderator's voice was lost in the din, his raised hands useless against the tide. I clutched the podium, my pages trembling beneath my fingers. For a moment, I feared I would be swallowed by the noise. Then a young woman in the front row stood up. Her voice cut clean through the chaos. "I was in Kaziah's class. I heard her read that orchard piece in 2005. It was hers." The room jolted, the murmurs shifted, weight tilting toward me. Lila's smile froze, then tightened. She leaned into her mic, tone sharper now. "Stories live in the collective. Memory isn't owned, it's shared. To claim otherwise is selfish." The crowd hissed. One man shouted, "You put your name on it," another added. "She's showing proof, you're giving excuses." Maya glanced at me, whispering, "Don't stop now, they're listening." My heart thundered. I lifted another tape. This recording is from a small reading at the university, 1999. 20 people in the room. Some of you may have been there. I pressed play. My younger voice spilled into the microphone, tinny but undeniable. "The orchard is a graveyard of sweetness." Gasps, nods, even claps. Someone in the middle rows cried, "I remember that night." The cracks in the crowd widened. Belief was shifting, sliding like ice breaking on a river. But Lila wasn't done. She strode toward me, heels clicking, eyes sharp. "You're exploiting nostalgia," she said coldly, loud enough for the hall to hear. "Dragging us into your bitterness because you never had the courage to publish." The words hit like a slap. The crowd murmured again, the tide threatening to turn. I steadied myself, throat burning. Then I spoke, clear as I could. You're right, I never published. But I lived these words, and living them cost me more than ink on paper. What did it cost you, Lila? A pen? A printer? The hall shuddered with the weight of the question, and for the first time, Lila had no answer ready. The silence that followed my question was louder than any applause. Lila's mouth opened, then closed again. Her polished mask cracked, just for a breath, and the crowd saw it. "Answer her!" someone shouted from the back. "Whose words are they?" another demanded. The moderator tried again to step in, his voice trembling. Perhaps we should allow Miss Hart, but the audience wasn't listening to him anymore. Their attention pinned Lila like a specimen under glass. Her voice, when it came, was thinner than before. I was inspired. Inspiration can be unconscious. Maybe I absorbed things without realizing. A wave of murmurs rolled through the hall. Inspiration, unconscious. Weak words from someone who had always sounded unshakable. Maya leaned close to me. "Now, Kez, show them the letter." I reached into my bag, fingers trembling, and pulled out a folded envelope. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded but legible. "This," I said, unfolding it, "is a letter Lila wrote to me in 2006. In it, she thanks me for letting her read my memoir drafts. She writes, and I quote, 'Your orchard chapter haunts me. I could never write something that true.'" Gasps again, sharper this time. I held the page high, the words glinting under the stage light. And yet, I continued, voice steadying. A decade later, she published that orchard chapter as her own, almost word for word. The room erupted. Shouts, applause, boos. The divide was tearing open wide, impossible to close. Lila's face drained of color. She snatched the mic. That letter, taken out of context, but her voice was drowned by the crowd chanting now, some calling my name, others shouting hers. The festival had slipped beyond the moderator's control. I stood tall, clutching the letter in one hand, the microphone in the other. My heart pounded, but my fear had burned into something else. Fire. The hall was a storm I could no longer control. Half the crowd was on its feet, shouting my name, clapping, demanding justice. The other half tried to drown them out, defending Lila, insisting art belonged to everyone. The moderator's pleas dissolved into static. Volunteers rushed down the aisles, waving their hands, trying to calm people. But it was too late. And then I saw the phones, dozens of them, lifted high, recording every word, every shout, every page I held in my hands. The realization hit me like a bolt. This wasn't just between me and Lila anymore. This battle had escaped the walls of the festival. By tonight, by morning, the world would be watching. Lila saw it too. She straightened her jacket, forcing composure back onto her face. Into the mic, she said, "This is a spectacle, a bitter woman's attempt to rewrite history. Don't let her fool you." Her words were sharp, but her eyes flickered. She knew the cameras were dangerous. Maya nudged me. "Kez, speak to the cameras, not just to them, to everyone." I lifted the letter higher, my voice steady now. "This is not bitterness. This is theft. These pages, these tapes, this letter, they are my life, my orchard, my grief, my truth. And I will not let anyone wear them like a costume." The crowd roared. The noise became unbearable, a mix of cheers and boos, but the phone stayed steady, capturing everything. Security stepped in, finally pulling the moderator aside, urging both me and Lila away from the stage. But the images, the sounds, they were already loose, already flying into feeds and timelines. As I was escorted off stage, Maya at my side, she whispered in my ear, "By tomorrow, this won't be just a festival fight. It'll be everywhere." And I knew she was right. The war had left the room. The next morning, my phone buzzed before the sun even rose. At first, I thought it was Maya checking in. But when I looked, the screen was flooded. Texts, emails, missed calls. Notifications piling faster than I could read. The videos had gone viral. Clips of me holding the letter, me playing the tapes, me demanding whose blood grew the words. Millions of views overnight. Some called me brave. Others called me bitter. Hashtags sprouted like weeds. Hearts hot, justice for Kez, Park Team Lila, Park Orchard Gate. I sat at the kitchen table, phone trembling in my hands. The world was dividing into camps, each arguing over whether I was truth teller or jealous fraud. Maya arrived with coffee, already scrolling through her feed. "You're trending worldwide," she said, half awe, half warning. I covered my face with my hands. I didn't want this circus. I just wanted my words back. But this is the fight, Maya said firmly. And now you have a stage bigger than the festival. By noon, reporters were at my door. Local news vans idled on the street. Neighbors peeking from their windows. I refused to answer, my curtains drawn. But their microphones waited like vultures. Mark called. His voice was tense. Kez, publishers are already circling. Some want to re-release your memoir drafts, annotated. But others? They're siding with Lila. This isn't just literary now. It's business. It's power. The weight of it pressed down hard. I hadn't asked for power. I'd only asked for truth. But the world doesn't just want truth. It wants a spectacle. That night, I sat with my journal, staring at the blank page. The noise outside was deafening. News alerts, tweets, podcasts dissecting my life. I wrote only one line. If I don't tell my story myself, someone else will. And I realized then it wasn't enough to expose Lila. I had to reclaim my voice in full before the world decided who I was without me. The noise outside wouldn't stop. Every time I refreshed my phone, another headline appeared. Mentor versus prodigy. Small-town writer sparks literary war. Truth or jealousy? The questions weren't going away, and if I stayed silent now, silence would be my answer. That night, Maya sat across from me at the kitchen table, our mugs of tea growing cold. You can't hide, she said. Not anymore. I never wanted this spotlight. But it's here, so the only choice left is whether you let others define you or you define yourself. Her words struck deep. She was right. For 60 years, I had carried these words in drawers, boxes, shoe boxes of cassette tapes. Maybe I had been too afraid to let them breathe. Maybe Lila had only stolen what I was too timid to release. But now I had no choice but to release them on my own terms. I opened my laptop and typed an announcement. Just a few sentences. Tomorrow evening, I will live stream a public reading of my memoir drafts, along with recordings and annotations that prove their provenance. My story is mine, and I will tell it in my own voice. Maya read it and nodded. That's it. That's how you take it back. I hovered over the post button, hand trembling. What if no one watched? Or worse, what if millions watched? Ready to laugh, ready to dismiss me. But then I remembered the orchard, my brother's bloodied hands, the silence that had cut deeper than words. I pressed post. Within minutes, the announcement spread. Retweets, shares, comments. Some mocking, some supportive, but all watching. By midnight, the scheduled stream had thousands of reminders set. I shut the laptop and leaned back in my chair, my body shaking, adrenaline burning through me. Tomorrow there would be no moderator, no stage lights I didn't control, no one to cut my mic. Tomorrow it would be my voice, raw, unfiltered, undeniable. When the clock struck 7, I sat in front of my laptop. The glow of the screen lit my living room. Stacks of drafts piled around me like battlements. Maya sat off to the side, steady as a sentry, her phone recording as backup. My hand hovered over the Go Live button. For a moment, I thought I might faint. Then I clicked. The screen blinked, and suddenly the numbers appeared. Hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands. Viewers pouring in from around the world. The chat scrolled so fast I couldn't read it. Some cheered, some mocked, some demanded truth. But they were all watching. I leaned toward the microphone. My name is Kaziah Monroe. For 60 years, I have carried these words. Tonight, I share them with you, not as echoes in someone else's voice, but as my own. I lifted the first draft and began to read. My voice trembled at first, then steadied, growing stronger with each sentence. Between passages, I played tapes. My younger self spoke into the digital void, her voice echoing across decades. The effect was haunting, past and present layered together, undeniable. The chat exploded. She has proof. This is haunting. This is hers. At one point, Maya held up the letter to the camera, the ink glowing under the desk lamp. I read the lines aloud, letting the words sting the air. My throat burned, but I didn't stop. For over an hour, I read, tape by tape, page by page. And by the end, when I set down the final draft, the chat slowed. The flood of words condensed into a wave of hearts, applause emojis, messages of thanks. I looked straight into the lens. My orchard is mine, my grief is mine, my truth is mine, and no one will steal it again. I ended the stream. The silence in the room was overwhelming, but it wasn't the silence of loss. It was the silence of something returned. Maya's eyes glistened. You did it, Kez. I didn't answer. I just breathed, deep, full, like I hadn't in years. Because for the first time, I felt the story was mine again. The morning after the live stream, I woke to silence. Not the suffocating silence of being erased, but the heavy, sacred quiet that follows a storm. My phone blinked beside me, overrun with messages. Maya brought coffee, her face pale from staying up all night. "You need to see this," she whispered, sliding her tablet across the table. Headlines flooded the screen. Elder writer reclaims her words in viral livestream. Proof or performance? The literary world reacts. Lila Hart silent after Monroe's broadcast. Clips of my reading had been shared millions of times. People debated, dissected, fought in comments. But one thing was clear. My voice had been heard. Mark called with trembling excitement. "Kez, I've had 3 publishers on the line this morning. They want your memoir, unedited, annotated, complete. They want you." I laughed, though tears streaked my cheeks. 60 years of hiding, and now the world wanted the very words I'd feared weren't enough. Of course, not everyone believed. Some still defended Lila, calling me bitter, manipulative. But their voices felt smaller now, weaker against the tide. Because I knew what I had done. I had placed the truth in the open, where no one could erase it again. That evening, I returned to my orchard, what remained of it. The trees were old, branches twisted, fruit sparse, but they were mine. I stood beneath them, the cool wind brushing my face. I whispered aloud, "They know now. They finally know." A peace I hadn't felt in decades settled in my chest. Not victory, not triumph, but something softer. Restoration. My story wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished, but it was mine. And that was enough. End of story.